Well, our trip to Bethlehem didn't start out the way we would have liked. After just a couple days of being there, we started to feel sick and tested positive for COVID. So, for the next 8 days, we were in quarantine. While we never got very sick, we spent a fair amount of time sleeping and we suffered from boredom. Every day we spent some time on the roof checking out the neighborhood, and after 4 in the afternoon, when everyone had gone home, we walked around the campus. It was not what we were there for.
The first thing we were able to do was harvest olives. Our next door neighbors were Andrew and Karen Bush. They lived in the apartment next to ours. He taught at the college and pastored the church in Jerusalem. The East Jerusalem International Church had services in English, and we decided to make it our home church while we were there. They had 14 olive trees in the yard of the church, and the olives needed picking. So a day was set, and the whole group showed up to get the job done. That Sunday, we had the opportunity to worship with them, and most every Sunday after that while we were there. We really enjoyed getting to know them and worshiping with them. Over the time we were there, we had 3 meals together, which was really helpful for us getting to know one another. Being an international English-speaking church, we had visitors from around the world almost every week. Visitors from Scandinavia, South Africa, North America, and more. This made every week very special.
Back at the college, we began our work at the guest house. Michael, our boss, but he didn't like to be called that, was a wonderful man to get to know. He was hardworking and fun-loving, and we got along great. One of my first jobs was to strip all the caulking off the showers in 11 rooms in the older area of the guest house and recaulk them, as well as any other small fixes in those bathrooms. While I did that, Trudy helped Anita in the gift shop and several other things around the campus. During this time, I also cleaned all the windows in the rooms and fixed all the screens that were torn and needed replacing.
October did not have many guests, but every day we would go to a small breakfast room on the top floor of the guest house and have our breakfast and welcome any guests that were there, as well as help them know their way around Bethlehem.
November was a different story. The guest house now welcomed groups. Most were 15 to 20 people, and they were there for 2 or 3 days at a time. So our days looked quite different. We were often up at 5 a.m., and by 6 we were in the kitchen cooking breakfast. The guests started showing up around 7, and it was 9:30 or 10 before we were all cleaned up. Almost all weekdays, we had lunch at the school with the rest of the staff and students. Then, around 5, we were back in the kitchen preparing for dinner. Though the food was catered in, we still needed to get things set up and warmers prepared, as well as the garnishings. We were done cleaning up by 9:30 and went home to bed. This was hard work, but it was also fun, and we enjoyed it very much.
The staff around campus were all really great people. Madonna cleaned and prepared the rooms for the guests. She didn't speak much English, but by the time we left, she was doing much better. Bashar was one of the main maintenance people, and he got along great with Dave. He didn't want him to leave because he made his work fun. Jim was there teaching the staff and people from the community English. He was very caring and fun-loving. We could go on because there were admin staff we got to know and some of the teaching staff as well. Nelson and Ellen were there for a 9-month stay to work on a special project with staff. There were the media people and those working at the Shepherd Society that we saw every day. Wonderful, every one of them. All of us took care of some feral kittens who lived just outside our door.
We had most weekends off, and we used that time to travel and see some of the local sights. We walked around the center of Bethlehem 2 or 3 times a week. It was about a 4-kilometer round-trip walk. On one of our first trips outside Bethlehem, we went to a small town 20 minutes from Bethlehem called Battir. We had to take a taxi, and there were plenty of choices, but they weren't all fair with their prices when they knew you were a tourist. Walking up the street to get a taxi, Trudy asked which one we were going to take. My response was the first one we come to, as I felt God knew which one. As we got near where the taxis stayed, a man walked over and asked if he could help us, and he gave us a good price for the trip. So we said, let's go. Ishmael was our taxi driver from that point on, and his prices were always good, and we were fair to him. Battir was an amazing little town with a spring well and terraced gardens where they grew amazingly large cabbages and vegetables and fruits. As we got out of the taxi, a woman greeted us and wanted us to help her. She was trying to open a tourist information center and asked our opinion on some of the things she was trying to do. She served us coffee and we talked and told us her name was Miriam. I said, just like in the Bible, and she responded by saying, yes, and that her father was Ishmael and her grandfather was Abraham. We all laughed. It was a very special encounter.
We also went to the Herodium, a place that Herod the Great had built for himself on the top of a man-made mountain. It was also where Herod the Great was buried. We went to Husan, another village with terraced gardens and spring water. We made a full-day trip to Jericho and saw where Jesus was baptized and the sycamore tree, in quotes, tongue-in-cheek, that Zacchaeus climbed, and rode a cable car up to a monastery on the side of a mountain. We also enjoyed an evening of Palestinian music performed by teachers and students from a music school there in Bethlehem. We didn't sit still for long. Ada Refugee Camp is one of 2 or 3 in Bethlehem, a short walk from where we stayed. It started in 1950 with 1,200 residents. Today, over 5,500 live there in the same small space. The key and keyhole at the entrance hold great significance to the Palestinians, and it feels like a ghetto.
Every week we went into Jerusalem to go to church. Even though the Bushes drove in, their vehicle was always full, and so we took the bus. We really enjoyed rubbing shoulders with the Palestinians, but sometimes on the way home at 4 in the afternoon, our shoulders were closer than we would have liked, as the bus was so full you couldn't fall over if you tried. After church, we would walk through the streets of the old city. We walked the Via Dolorosa a couple of times and walked through the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. We had meals along the narrow streets and spent time by the Wailing Wall. One day, we managed to get up on the Temple Mount and walked past the mosque and the Dome of the Rock. Another afternoon, we walked to the Garden of Gethsemane and spent an hour or so letting that place soak in. These were amazing days, walking where Jesus walked and taking in the sights and sounds and smells of this amazing city. We finished our time in Bethlehem as they were preparing for Christmas. Star Street was lit with stars, and a huge tree was put up in Manger Square and decorated. We enjoyed some last times walking around Bethlehem and preparing to go home. Christmas was upon us, and it was time to celebrate.